also felt like we've been giving the frivolous a bit of a short shift. Wait a minute.
Short shrift.
Shrift. What is a shrift?
Google, come to the rescue.
Yeah, absolutely. There's several turns of phrase like this, by the way, where I use them commonly, but I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing the word incorrectly.
Shrift is a confession, especially to a priest. Interesting. I did not know that.
Huh. What's a short shrift?
A short shrift is just a barely adequate confession.
Not giving a topic its proper due, or its
Right.
or something its proper attention, giving it the short shrift.
That makes sense. You know, I sinned. That's about all I have to say about it.
Right.
No, my son, you must tell me more.
Right, yeah.
Like I've ever been in confession. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about.
Have you never been to confession, Tom?
No.
Oh, well, my son, you have an opportunity now in this conversation with the world listening to bare your soul.
No, you know I don't do that.
Well, you have an opportunity, Tom. You got to keep open the possibilities.
I bear my pseudo soul, which is the soul that I pretend to have.
Yeah, but, the core, podcasting advice is that people like the genuine, right? They like the honest. They like the real, not the pretend, not the persona. They want to know, Tom, the people want to know you.
I really don't think that's true.
So Tom, the reviews on iTunes have started to come in.
Yeah, it's always good to see that.
Yeah, and I am pleased as punch that people are listening and seem to be enjoying and yeah, I just wanted to thank our listeners who have done that so far. Our first few reviews coming in from 3Cat Pat and Cake Amanda and the Banana Boat. And if you want to support the show, leaving us a review on iTunes is a great way to do that.
It's very useful especially for new podcasts, to get as many reviews as you can, because that just increases our potential exposure to more new listeners, which is what we want.
Yes, we want to take over the world. That is the ultimate explicitly stated goal, is world domination. So are you not quite into that?
No, I'd be happy with just a few more listeners. I don't need the whole world.
Yeah, what is your goal, Tom? To tangent there.
What is my goal?
Not your life goal.
Yes.
Although that's a very interesting tangent. Which concentric circle? What is your goal with the podcast?
It's just something fun to do. That is a way of expressing yourself in a different way that I'm used to. A challenge.
Yeah. So I would say that my personal goal with it is probably very similar. So I think back to last July when you sent me the email saying, hey, do you want to do this? In 5 seconds, I sort of just went through oh my gosh, that seems like a crazy endeavor. But then I was just like, yes, let's just do it. Which is not really like me. I don't typically just immediately ascribe to major projects like that in a very short period. But I really liked the notion of evolving a craft of creative self-expression. To me, is just a very satisfying, engaging thing. I just love learning about things, whether it's the audio tech or the how you make a podcast available in the world, or the evolving the skill of being able to talk without sounding like a complete, what do I want to say?
That is a skill.
Yes, that is a skill. I'm just going to leave it at that. Without sounding like a complete. So that's fun. I also find it helpful for me personally in terms of just overall self-improvement.
Yes.
We've hit on several times about how self-awareness and consciousness and reflection is a very helpful thing to do in the area of just general life self-improvement, right? And so I find just the act of talking about these things and just being more conscious and just having something that's a regularly pulsed activity for me to do where I focus on a topic, it sort of has a carryover effect to the rest of my life.
Yes.
In terms of being conscious and attentive and exploring things. And now that we're at this point where we're live to the world, we have a certain number of listeners and we would like to grow the podcast. It does make me wonder, well, why do I want to grow it? Why, aren't our dear listeners right now enough for us, Tom? What do we need? I don't have a good answer for that in my mind. Like, why isn't one listener enough? Right?
Why do we publish it at all?
I don't have a good answer for that. So it is interesting. I'm always sort of going back and forth between, what is it about communicating with the outside world and real people and a larger set of those people that makes it a more engaging experience than just us talking to each other over Skype. I don't know.
I think it, in a certain way, it gives your creative expression more significance or meaning if other people enjoy it or consume it. I mean, does an artist need to have people see their paintings or their photographs, or does a musician need to have an audience to hear their music? No, but it certainly makes their craft more worthwhile to them, probably.
Yeah, that's a really good question that I don't have a good answer to. Because if you completely take the monetization of art out of the equation, then why is an artist producing art? I should pause here and say I'm not trying to put you and I in the realm of artists, okay?
This is not great art, folks.
But although that's another funny tangent, isn't it? So on the one hand, I don't want to be all like, yo, we're like all hip and creative, talented artists. That just seems so like, it seems so arrogant, right? To put that hat on. On the other hand, I think there's an equally unbalanced sense of thinking of this as completely worthless. Like, I mean, we've jokingly called this, blather that we try and edit and make somewhat listenable. Mm-hmm. But that's maybe a little too self-deprecating for a non-joking analysis, right? So thinking of this as an act of creative self-expression, that balance of how do I think about it and how do I think about myself in terms of just maintaining a healthy, balanced sense of ego, where I don't think I'm such great shakes, but I don't think I'm so terrible either. To me, that's very interesting. And I guess the personal feel of that just gets heightened when I share it with others, right? Because it's easy to, I should say, it's a higher risk when you expose yourself to the world, because you're exposing yourself to accolades, but also criticism.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And it's been really nice that our listeners so far have been very positive on us, and we've received some constructive criticism as well.
The accolades have outweighed the insults so far. Thankfully.
Yeah. Well, I also want to thank our listeners, not just for saying, oh, we enjoy it, but we've gotten some good constructive feedback about, oh, this didn't work out so well, could you adjust this? And that's been very helpful. But, one experience we haven't had yet, Tom, maybe this is just a result of the size of the listening audience, that sooner or later, someone's going to hate it.
Are you issuing a challenge?
I mean, you know what I mean? Like, sooner or later, being on the internet means somebody really not liking what you're doing and being not entirely nice about it. And
if you want more listeners, you got to be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
Because the more listeners you get, the more cranky pants are going to show up.
Yes, cranky pants. So that's interesting. So as our listeners have expanded, you've been sending me some of the stats, and you sent me a list of all the listeners by country.
Oh, yeah. The downloads by country. Yeah, that's always fun to look at when I browse our download stats. Yeah,
so as one might expect, the U.S. is our top country because we're sitting here in the U.S. and our immediate friends and family are in the U.S. Yeah, but then we have listeners in other countries, and
that just freaks me out.
Yeah, it threw me for a loop way more than it should have. Obviously, if you're publishing a podcast in iTunes and iTunes is available all over the world, then people who listen to podcasts all over the world can find it. The internet is international by definition. And yet to know that we have listeners in, so our number 2 country is the UK, which is probably, again, not a bad guess considering we're broadcasting in English here. But then Norway was our 3rd country, is that correct?
At one point, Norway is up there, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the fact that there's somebody out there in Norway listening to us is just an unbelievable thing. And we've had some listeners in Denmark and Netherlands. Is that correct?
That's right. And we recently got a review from the Netherlands in the Netherlands iTunes store too, which we're very appreciative of.
Yes, absolutely. You were telling me about this, and I had mentioned something about what was my confusion? So I exposed my extreme American geographic ignorance.
Yes, you confused the Dutch with the Danes.
I'm so sorry I did that. Like, I really have to apologize to the world for that. The ignorant American shines his light upon the world. Yes. So, have you ever been to the Netherlands or Denmark?
My wife and I went to Amsterdam a few years ago, which was a terrific city. Terrific city. We had a really good time there.
Nice.
For a few days. Excellent art museums. Canals are fun.
Now, how long did you have there?
I think we were there for about 4 days, and we did a lot of walking around the city and checked out the art museums and did a canal boat ride, and it was just a beautiful city.
So 4 days. So, like, when you go to a new city and you have about that order of magnitude of time,
yeah.
Like, what's your game plan? Are you typically, hey, let's just walk and check out classic culture stuff, or are you like, let's put the camera on the front and be a tourist? Are you like, how do you most absorb this different perspective of the world?
We typically try to do a lot of walking just around if it's a city around town, and see all the typical big sites that you'd be interested in.
Right.
We always try to fit in whatever local art museums are, because it's a big interest of ours.
Do you have a particular style of art that you're all into, or just everything?
Everything. And there's some fantastic art museums in Amsterdam. The Rijksmuseum, it's got several Vermeers in there and a whole boatload of Rembrandts, obviously.
Several different, what's in there?
Vermeers.
Vermeer.
Yes.
I don't know anything about Vermeer. Other than he sounds Dutch.
Well, look up the Milkmaid.
Will I recognize this, you think?
Well, it's one of the most famous paintings in the world.
Really?
It's by Vermeer. And we got to see it when we went to Amsterdam. It's just a wonderful little painting.
Huh.
You're not overly excited.
I mean, okay, I have to admit, I don't really have the eye for it. So it's kind of like somebody plays you classical music for the first time. And you're like, I don't know, is it any good? Like, it seems pretty cool. She's sitting there with her jug of milk, presumably, and
well, you got to see it in person.
So just looking at it on the internet, it just looks kind of a bland painting of a woman pouring milk. What's so amazing about that? What's your okay? You're standing there in front of it. Other than the fact that it's very famous, right? Like, say, here's a good way to ask it. Say you knew nothing about Vermeer or painting or whatever, and you were just in somebody's house, and that original painting was on the wall. What about it would be impactful to you?
The detail of it, the way the artist captures the sunlight coming into the window is very lifelike. Just the composition of it is just a pleasing image to look at.
Composition meaning like there's certain percentage of color over in one side and a certain percentage of color over in another side?
Well, that's part of it, but just, the figure, the detail of it, her expression on her face.
You think she's happy?
Well, that's a good question. Is she happy? That's if the piece makes you ask these questions, that it's a bit more, has more value than something that doesn't make you ask questions.
That's true. Well, what do you think? Do you think she's happy?
I think she's content. She's performing a job.
So what year was this?
This is like 1600s. Let me look.
Do you think she's probably a servant, or do you think she owns the place?
She's a servant.
Okay. So you think she's happy in her servitude?
No, I don't.
What world? Oh, you don't? So she's not happy?
Well, she's content in performing her duty, I think.
So maybe overall in life she's not happy, but for the moment she's blocked out the misery of her servitude and is enjoying the simple act of pouring milk.
Exactly. She's focused on her task at hand. She's pouring milk into a bowl. She's preparing bread for whoever she's going to bring the food to.
So what you're saying, Tom, is these masses of people in servitude, they really ought to forget about this uprising and like equal right kind of, like, look, accept your place in life and be happy that you can even pour milk and that somebody's painting you.
So you've become an art fan, I see.
It's pretty much what you're saying. No, so like when you're in a museum, how much time do you spend like at each painting? Like, do you give yourself time to absorb it, or are you like painting, boom, boom, boom?
It depends. I mean, there's things that are skippable, and And then there's the masterpieces, which you want to savor as you're on your trip through the museum.
Right. I guess I'm trying to think of the analogy of if you hear a great piece of music for the first time, it's going to be different than after you're familiar with it, after you've given it time to absorb. And so if I'm just some schmo without any advanced art knowledge and I'm trying to get the most I can out of these great pieces of art, I'm trying to think of the best way to do it. I guess just sort of open your mind and experience and try and just give your attention over to it for a spell. Eh?
Yeah. You don't really have to know anything about art. I mean, I don't really know much about art other than the fact that I enjoy it. But there's some paintings or images that you see that just immediately just capture you somehow. You don't know why they're good, but if you walk into a room and it's there looking back at you, and you immediately just feel something about it. And that's why art museums are great, because they often have those images in there that just, once you walk into that room, you just, I want to look at that in more detail.
So I've been staring at the milkmaid this whole time, and yes. I'm starting to appreciate it a little more, which
good,
is
good.
Yeah, but it's a little different than what you just said, though. Like when my immediate reaction to this was it was kind of bland and uninteresting, but the more I've sort of just sat with it and stared at it, like I like, I guess, what you were previously calling composition, just like deciding to put this figure in the frame here. Like, I guess, like what a good photograph does, right? Where you're framing the shot.
And a painting like this is a lot more vibrant in the flesh, so to speak, when you see it in the museum, rather than reproduced digitally on your computer screen. I mean, like the blues in her shawl there it just pops when you see it, the actual oil painting.
Speaking of which, Tom, and now just that we're on the topic of kind of art, I wanted to send you a link. You like to send me links.
I usually do like to send you links.
So let me be the link sender this time. Oh, whoops. I just sent you a link by putting the link in my own browser. I'm not sure you're going to get that.
I have not received it yet.
Okay, let me go over to Skype. Okay, I just sent you a link. So why don't you open that? And I encountered this concept, this type of art, a few days ago. And I was immediately, so speaking of immediate reactions, I was immediately in love with it. Tom, do you know what automaton is?
Automaton? No, I've not seen this term before.
Well, it's your namesake, so you should be very happy to learn of it.
I'm reading the article you sent me, and it says right at the top here, automaton is a preserved architectural relic which serves no purpose.
Yes, and so as you can just scroll down some examples of this link to sort of let the idea wash over you, but what we're looking at here are things like a spiral staircase in the middle of a parking lot that just ends nowhere.
Right.
A doorway that's about 20 feet off the ground that is clearly inaccessible.
I like the stairway handrail in the middle of a brick wall when there's no stairs anywhere in view. Yep. I like that.
There's a ladder that starts about 200 feet off the ground and so clearly inaccessible.
Oh, yeah. I love this. Yes, I love this. I love it.
Awesome. Okay,
so you're gonna put this link in the show notes so people can go to our website and find the link and look at the stuff for yourself. It's worth looking at.
Yes.
This is great stuff.
This is pretty great. So this is definitely something that you should check out and just get your visceral reaction to. Does this stuff really bother you, or are you like, this is amazing?
This is amazing. I love this.
Okay, so automaton. So this is a concept that was coined by a Japanese artist in the 1980s by the name of Akesagawa Genpai, where he noticed these things around Japan. And the quintessential attribute of these things are not just that it's not just that they no longer serve any purpose, it's that they apparently continue to be preserved, right? Yes. They're not just falling apart. So, and Tom, I don't know if you remember, but in our hometown there was one of these.
The little spiral staircase.
Yes, we used to call it the Stairway to Heaven.
Yes. It was a spiral staircase. What was it in front of? It was in front of some
random auto shop or something. And
and it's just, I don't know if it's still there. I haven't been down that road in a long time, but it was just a metal spiral staircase that didn't actually go anywhere.
The last few years I had visited there during the holidays. It was decorated in Christmas wreaths and such. So it was certainly, preserved.
Oh, good.
So this artist, Akesagawa Genpai, coined this term, and he coined it Thomason because apparently there was a baseball player, an American baseball player, who came over to play in the Japanese leagues by the last name of Thomason for a very large sum. and he was terrible. so, so much so that they benched him and really didn't play him at all. And so this notion of something that is preserved and yet has no purpose, and so he and his students came up with this term of Thomason. And just so, Tom, I was speaking with you at the beginning of the record here about how I feel like maybe we've given the frivolousness the short shrift in our coverage of the interesting, the useful, and the frivolous. So this is the purely and beautifully sublime frivolous.
Yes, and it kind of unintentionally acts as modern art in a way as well.
So this is something that was created unintentionally as art. Passage of time has its say, and the purposefulness is decoupled from it, and then it is revealed as art.
Yeah, it's the active preservation of it that makes it art. I think it gives it meaning. I mean, because all these things could have been removed, but they weren't. And so they've now attached meaning to them by being preserved in the context into a missing context that is no longer there.
And it's a pretty fun concept to think about, like, why did these things... You can understand how a building could be designed and, oops, we created a wrong door, or, oh, we don't need this edge of the sidewalk anymore. You can understand how they could come into existence, but what prompts a human being to preserve these things? Right?
Because they elicit a feeling of whimsy that is the same reason we're enjoying looking at these pictures. Like, probably the people who live in these neighborhoods get a kick out of them as well.
Right. It's sort of like people go along with the norm, and if something exists, it's the presumption. If you see something functional, especially something very ordinary like these things out in the world, you presume that it has a purpose, and so therefore it needs to be maintained. I mean, that's the default assumption.
It's fun to see things that absolutely serve no purpose whatsoever.
Absolutely. I absolutely 100% love that. So, poking around the Wikipedia rabbit hole a little bit, apparently it's not super surprising that this type of art was first observed and made known to the world in Japan. So I guess in Japan, there's this concept of wabi-sabi. Have you ever heard of this concept?
I have not, no.
Okay, so the essence of wabi-sabi, I'll just read a bit here from the Wikipedia, is true beauty, whether it comes from an object, architecture, visual art, etc., it doesn't reveal itself until the winds of time have had their say. A cracked pot, for example, has an essence that a perfectly round pot is lacking. And so the beauty is in the cracks, the worn spots, and the imperfectness of the thing. I don't know enough about art to completely articulate it, but apparently this concept of wabi-sabi is as core to the Japanese aesthetic of what is beautiful as the Greek ideas of beauty have influenced Western. It's this sort of the beauty of the imperfection. It made me think of one thing in my own work in software engineering. There's this notion of agile software development.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I've heard the term, but explain it to me what the process is.
So basically, the classic notion of how you develop a large piece of software is the waterfall method, which is we should get together and define all the requirements of what this software should be as step one. And then step two should fall down and we should make a design. And then step three should follow that we should do our development. And then step four, we do our testing, and then we release, and then we're done. As if a waterfall flowing from one step to the next. And Agile comes along and says, that's great, but it's really hard to know exactly what a piece of software should be doing all at the beginning. And what invariably happens, particularly when you're trying to match a piece of software to the changing needs of the environment, is that the design needs change or the requirements change. And so you have to adjust on the fly. And that's really hard to do if you only have one shot at flowing down this waterfall, right? So Agile says, instead of trying to do the whole thing in one go, just try and do the first most core aspect of the thing. Don't worry that it's not perfect. Don't worry that you didn't get every little thing. Just try and do the smallest, most useful increment.
Got it.
So you
understand.
And so not only does that save you from wasting time in things that you might not need, but it gives you this great feedback of real software working in the world. So you sort of get your first iteration out there, people actually use it, and you say, oh, now we know more about this than we would have at design time when we were just making educated guesses. And so you do the next iteration. And so part of it bumps up against this core engineering principle of you want to get everything exact and perfect and, without rough edges, right? And so you sort of have to embrace this idea that, well, you're going to be releasing things and you may have to change things later on the fly, and you have to let the passage of time react to your imperfections so that you can sort of manage this evolving thing over it. So apparently this, when you read more fluffy philosophies of software development, they'll talk occasionally about wabi-sabi and the passage of time.
These Thomasons kind of remind me of something else that I've seen people collect on the internet as far as pictures.
Okay.
And that is desire paths. Have you ever seen these?
Desire paths?
Yes.
Never heard the term.
All right. I'm sending you a link now. Hold on. And you'll like this as someone who deals in user experience.
Okay.
So let me hold on.
Okay, so you sent me an image.
Yes.
User experience study. Okay, cool. I like that image.
Yes. So what this image is of a pedestrian walkway, but the corner is being cut through the grass by people walking, trying to cut the corners. And so there's a path developing in the grass that's outside of the paved walkway. And that is called a desire path because it's recording the desire of the people who are using this walkway is to not go around that sharp corner, but to cut through. And so there's lots of Tumblrs and Flickr groups that share pictures of and there's a subreddit, I think, too, that shares pictures of desire paths found in the wild.
That is a wonderful image. So there's this book that is considered the seminal work in usability, which is how people actually use things that are designed, called Don't Make Me Think. It's by a author named Steve Krug. And it's essentially this concept that, using the example of website design, about how at the time of design, we make these educated guesses and we think from an engineering perspective how somebody is going to use a system. And so we lay out, the options of what our website contains at the top, and we provide buttons and searches, and then what people actually do with it is something totally different. And how when you're designing the user interface for a website or any system, what you really want to do is get something out there, have people react to it and use it, and then contour the structure of how people are interfacing with your system to the paths that they are showing you they actually are going to use, and what the common solutions and problems to that are. So in this image, what you would do is have people walk from one section to another and then say, oh, they're using this. And then you would actually put the paved road where it says user experience.
Instead, they put the paved road where they imagined people wanted to go, but it didn't match up with what the reality became.
Yeah. And
so these desire paths form. And you'll see this in any park you go into. There'll be, unless there's a keep off the grass sign, there'll be paths that have been created in the grass from people just cutting corners and going to where they want to go.
Yeah. Dear listener, before you look at the picture, that's exactly what's going on here, is that they're cutting the corner. Yeah, I really, really love this concept, this core concept of user interface design, because the driver of it is practical experience. And all you're doing as a user interface designer is contouring the design of the interface to what people are actually using. In fact, you could think of it as the extreme of having a completely blank canvas and then just putting paint on the bottom of people's shoes, having them walk, and then say, oh, look, that's where people are walking. And then you just pave the spots where people are most commonly walking. And it's amazing to me, no matter how much I read or learn about user interface design, no matter how many different types of systems I do, I'm always making false assumptions about what people are going to interpret, whether you label buttons with certain description, or you provide a search functionality in a different place of the page or whatever. And the amazing thing about usability, so this Steve Krug book talks about usability testing, where you basically get the first base level working model of something and you just have people react to it. And you have people describe to you as they're going through your system what they're thinking. They're like, oh, I think that this tab means product browsing, and so I'm clicking over here, and I think that this tab is going to tell me about shipping policy, and so I'm going over here. And then it doesn't really take that many examples of people doing this before it becomes obvious to you what the flaws are and where you need to adjust, right? Like you can spend a lot of money and do lab-based usability testing, but you could do very, very cheap, really just sitting down sidecar with somebody and having them describe their experience and saying, oh, all right, That's common sense that I missed at the point of design, which is not surprising that a software engineer would miss that at the point of design, not because they're geeky engineers and know nothing about user interfaces, but it's just when you're so engrossed in the insides of something, it can be really hard to adopt the perspective of somebody coming from the outside with no previous knowledge.
So since becoming aware of these desire paths, I start to see it more often in my own walking around the city and stuff like that. And I expect now I'll be looking out for Thomasons as well.
Yeah, I mean, I love that notion. So there's a International Thomasons Institute that this this artist has founded in Japan, which since his book was translated into English about 6 or 7 years ago, it's been a bit of a resurgence, and now people will find Thomasons and post this on Facebook. So we can share that as well. The other little bit of follow-up I had. So I've had some good discussions offline with some of our listeners about the fake news topic that we hit on.
Oh, yeah?
A little bit in the Reddit as well. So forget about fake news. Just talk about news. I find myself still without a clear sense of what a good level of information is in terms of my mental hygiene.
Okay.
I mean, we live in the U.S. It's been a tumultuous political time, and there's a lot going on in the world. I guess there's always a lot going on in the world, right? And so I struggle with this balance of, on the one extreme, you could just stick your head in the sand and say, I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do on my own, and I don't want to learn about what's going on in the world around me. And the other extreme would be, I want to know everything 24/7 and just have your eyes and ears glued to the information stream about what's happening in the world.
I don't think that's the choice you need to make.
I agree, but I was just sort of trying to bound the imbalances. I don't know where that line is, though, and how to, like, what do I follow in order to determine what that balance is? Because for me, the compulsion to follow information, even if it's totally true, right? The compulsion to follow the information is that this stuff is important, it's relevant, and so I have this kind of like visceral human sense of I want to know, right? And and yet, am I fooling myself that simply quote unquote being informed is doing me any good? Or like, do I just need to make some sort of arbitrary cutoff point where I say, okay, I have consumed 20 minutes of news today, no more, right? Because it can make you pretty stressed.
I think you need to focus on your sources of news rather than the amount that you consume. For me, like I mentioned before, that I don't consume TV news at all. I've completely removed that because I don't find any value in it. What I have found valuable is to follow U.S. news through an international news source that's outside the United States, because that tends to me be maybe a more objective view of things that aren't caught up in the day-to-day politics of, what is up and what is down.
Right. That's interesting. Looking at it from a different perspective.
An outsider's perspective, yes.
Outsider's perspective, right. That's interesting.
So, foreign newspapers that's published in English is a good source to look for news about your own country.
So I think what you say is reasonable, although it's still, for me, I still have this core problem of the volume. Even if it's completely true and accurate and insightful, like let's say I had a theoretical news source that was 100% truthful, accurate, complete, insightful, but it was just broadcasting 24/7 with like really important, relevant, insightful news. It's not like I'm the emperor of the world, right? And I actually have the power to alter these world events that I'm listening to. So to what extent do I need that briefing?
You probably don't.
So
you probably don't.
Do I need it at all?
I think you need it at certain intervals, but certainly not on in the 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah. So I guess. So I'm glad you brought that up. So in terms of, we had spoken before about the evolution of technology and how that's changed the distribution mechanism of news and information to make it more democratized. But the other thing it's done since the advent of cable news, certainly, is just make news 24/7.
Yeah.
Right. Where if you wanted to, you could. It used to be the news would come on, the evening news, quote unquote, right? That was the classic. After dinner, you watch your hour, and that was like your news fix. So yeah, so by default, if I just consume news whenever it's available, it will never stop.
You want to know what I want?
I do want, in general, Tom, I do want to know what you want. Yes.
I'm not aware of any news site that's done this yet, but if they is, please someone point me to it. And if no one has done this, I'm giving you $1 million idea here. What I want is a news source that is not tied to the 24-hour news cycle. It doesn't make any sense that in an on-demand internet environment, we're still wedded to this 24-hour cycle where, like, the newspaper websites publish a newspaper every day, and their whole news cycle is based around that. I want a news source that isn't tied to a production of a physical thing like a newspaper or a television schedule. I want something that is aware of how often I check it. Like if I go to the website every 15 minutes, it behaves more like Twitter.
Right.
If I go to the website every week, it gives me a week summary of what happened in the past week and cuts out all the crap that I don't need to know about.
That's a really good idea, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Copyrighted 2-Bit Geeks 2017.
I want to have a sliding scale, a sliding scale news feed that if I check it every half hour, it gives me the updates of what's happened in the half hour. The reason I kind of thought of this idea is that, like, if I go away for the weekend, and I'm out in the hiking somewhere, and I come back on Monday and I look at the news, it basically has what happened in the last 24 hours.
Right.
I don't know what happened on Friday and Saturday. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I want it to know that, you've been gone for 3 days. This is the most important things that have happened in the 3 days. I want a website that if you expand the slider far enough, like if, say, it goes out to 50 years, it has, humans walked on the moon as the top story.
Right. That is excellent. So Reddit has this to a degree, right? Like
that's right. It does.
If you go to Reddit, the subreddit of news, there's a very rough cut where you can say, what are the top recommended items of the past 24 hours, week, month, and all time?
Yeah, but I want a worldwide, news organization that's top class to adopt this method rather than just be trying to chase the 24-hour news cycle as they always do. I want these newspaper websites to forget that they publish a newspaper is what I want, because they have the great journalists, they do all the great reporting, but they still have this dead format they're tied to every day that they need to dump as soon as possible, in my opinion.
They need to dump the physical production of a newspaper, is that what you're saying?
Yes. Get rid of the printing presses and give us the news that's important to us on the time scale that we consume it.
Yeah, so basically what you're talking about is something like Google News that has a slider at the top. Right. And you say, this time period, show me the top things. I like that, Tom.
Well, get on it.
Excellent idea. So, Tom, we were talking a little bit before about listener feedback.
Yeah.
As a software engineer, I keep thinking of our dear listeners as users, but I'm realizing as well that I'm referring to them as dear listeners. I think I have developed a bit of affection for people who listen to our blather.
Yeah, well, there is a bit of sympathy involved. We have to feel sorry for them.
Right. It can't be empathy because we don't really have that. I can't step out of it, but we hear you.
So, dear users, what do you think?
Yes. So one of the first comments we had was our discussions were fun and engaging, but one thing they noticed is that we seem to agree a lot on many things.
I don't think that's correct.
You don't?
I'm messing with you.
Oh, you are. I'm very gullible.
Yes, you are. I would agree with that.
I'm very trusting. I want to believe. Okay, slight tangent. When I try and understand like a big topic, I know that one of my shortcomings is my default tact is to believe everything I hear. And I think I quickly overcome that weakness by being open-minded to the second perspective, right? And then I believe everything I hear from that. And yet I need to be consistent with the first perspective, and so I try and merge it. And so it gets a little more truthy. And so the third perspective comes along, and I'm only going to believe what I know to be true from that. And so the percent truth I'm accepting for expansion is diminishing as the perspectives come in. But initially, when my mind is a blank, yeah, I'm pretty pretty gullible. I can be taken for a ride. But why did we get on that tangent? Oh, we were talking about the nature of tangents. Because... Why were we talking about the nature? Because...
this is just ridiculous.
So slightly dizzying.
We're just lost in a maze here.
Yes. Okay, I'm just going to grapple hook my way out. And because I just remembered that one of our earliest comments was that we disagree infrequently. And that made me think of when we were initially coming up with our list of topics that we might want to speak of. We had identified speed limits and following speed limits as something that is probably ripe for disagreement.
Okay.
Right?
Okay, yeah.
Searching the literature for this, I found a quote from a 20th century American poet that really spoke to me and how I feel about this, which is, gonna write me up a 125, post my face, wanted dead or alive, take my license, all that jive, I can't drive 55!
Oh, dear.
For international listeners, that's 89 kilometers, by the way. So, Tom, you reminded me as we were prepping for this that you had a rant on Facebook about this topic, which for you is pretty rare.
Yeah, I'm pulling that up now. A couple of years ago, I had a rant that didn't go anywhere on Facebook, but I think I remember you commented on it, disagreeing on a few points. But
I see. It's interesting. I don't even remember this.
Just as a little background, I drive. I have a long commute into work every day. I drive at least 40 miles each way every day. So I do a lot of highway driving, and I observe a lot of really atrocious driving, which is sometimes difficult to deal with, but I've come to grips with it in my own certain way.
We should say, for full disclosure, that we live in Massachusetts, and I don't know if every state and place thinks about themselves like this, but
we have an atrocious reputation as bad drivers here in Massachusetts. Yes.
Yeah, to be fair, I think possibly some of that is due to the road design. So Massachusetts, if you think of American settlement by Westerners as going from east to west, we were one of the first settled, right? And so the roads were initially created for cows and carriages and not automobiles. So very different than roads out west. I should also say, Tom, for my own personal use, so I also drive quite a bit in a slightly different configuration than you do. I drive on average 2 days a week, but my commute each way is about 100 miles.
Wow, yeah.
So we both have a fair amount of experience driving Massachusetts.
Yeah. So this is basically what I wanted to try to communicate to people as delicately as I could without being too obnoxious about it. But it basically is just how to improve your driving.
So you were trying to help others improve themselves.
Yes, for their sake and my own sanity. Right?
Like what percent of drivers do you think are really irresponsibly, egregiously under attentive?
Well, that gets right into point number one of my list. Point number one is you are a terrible driver. So I would say 100% of the people who are driving on the road need to pay attention to these things.
100.
Everybody is a terrible driver.
Okay, so you would include yourself in this.
Everybody, unless you're a professional and you do this for a living. If you're driving on the road, you gotta accept the fact that you're terrible at it. You have very poor reaction time, very poor spatial awareness. So as long as you acknowledge that, you can improve yourself. Because if you just drive along and you think you're a good driver, you're not. You're really, really bad, and you may not realize it. So if anyone's going to take anything away from this, I want them to remember that you are a terrible driver.
Okay, so you are firmly in the camp of we are all monkeys driving these heavy machines at ridiculous speeds, and automated cars cannot arrive soon enough.
That's right.
Okay.
So as soon as you acknowledge a realization like that, it's a lot easier to focus yourself on being a courteous and defensive driver, which is within everyone's capability. You're not going to be a super awesome race car driver, even though you think you might be. You can at least be a courteous driver. And that, I think, is the most important thing for people to remember.
A dose of humility goes a long way.
Yes.
I think, yeah. So this seems to be very much along the lines of a lot of things we've talked about, Tom, which is be aware that you have this cognitive interface which is flawed. Therefore, as you approach, interacting with whatever you're interacting with, know that you are imperfect and that you need to be attentive to that and improve.
Right. That relates directly to point number 2 for me.
Okay.
Which is you do not ever exceed the posted speed limit if you can.
Okay, so the posted speed limit. So why are speed limits posted the way they are? And what determines the limit that is set by law?
It can vary depending on where you live.
Yes, so we are speaking in the United States where, so one of the big moments in U.S. speed limit history was there was a oil embargo in 1973. And as a result, the U.S. set a national speed limit of 55 miles per hour, which is about 89 kilometers. But from 1974 to 1995, that was the speed limit, regardless of conditions or nature of the road or how people were driving. And also in the U.S., and I'm not sure how this is in other countries, it's pretty common when you exceed the speed limit for a police officer to pull you over and give you a ticket. And if you are exceeding the speed limit, you are violating the law.
Yes.
So in 1995, the national speed limit was lifted in the U.S., and since then, speed limits have been variable. On the highways in Massachusetts, the max speed is 65 miles an hour.
That's right.
And there are parts of the country where it can go up to 70, 75. There's one stretch in Texas, I think it's 85. And then across the world, there's quite variable ways of setting speed limits and enforcing that. Most people know there's sections in Germany on the Autobahns where there is no speed limit. Mm-hmm. The UK, I looked at this a little bit in the UK. So there's a national speed limit in the UK where it defines a max speed limit per type of road. And so it's, as opposed to the US where every single road has its own individualized, explicit limit of speed. So you say you should never exceed the speed limit.
If you can help it. I mean, obviously there's situations where you need to do it in an emergency or if it's unintentional, but for the most part, you should do your level best to stay within speed limits.
So Tom, what if the posted speed limit is slower than what is reasonable and prudent?
Well, that's just your judgment of what's reasonable and prudent. I mean, they don't pick these numbers out of a hat.
They don't, but there are different methods for picking those numbers, right? And some governments and municipalities have stricter requirements and some have looser requirements.
Who am I to say that my judgment is better than the people who are actually assigned to do this for a living?
True. So devil's advocate, what if a town sets a speed limit, you're coming around a corner, right? And the speed limit drops 10 miles an hour and there's old Smokey with the radar gun and bang, he gets you off to the side of the road. There goes your ticket. Your insurance is increased for the next 3 years. Speed trap. Are you cool with speed traps?
Absolutely.
So let me just be clear before you completely advocate for speed traps. So a municipality engaged in activity solely to increase its revenue.
Obviously, in certain situations, there's police departments and others that can game the system and for their own benefit.
So if you have a government or a municipality or whatever that is explicitly trying to hand out tickets as a cash generating mechanism, and it's completely above board, people are actually speeding, then you're totally fine with that.
Yeah, I am in general. In general, I am. Obviously, a system like that can be abused by towns and stuff. They would like to generate a lot of income through tickets, but in general, I think it's a good thing.
Rather, so the goal here is not to get people to follow a number. The goal is to get people to drive safely.
Yes. Keeping in mind rule 1 that you are a terrible driver. Why are you exceeding the speed limit if you're a terrible driver?
Right, but I just want to establish that setting a speed limit is done by a government in order to increase public safety. It's a means to an end.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
So one of the first problems, I think, with getting reasonable people to agree to a speed limit is that the speed limit itself is reasonable. And part of this problem, of this suspicion of is a speed limit reasonable, is this monetary incentive for the government to give you speeding tickets. So in Massachusetts, half the money for a ticket goes to the police department that writes the ticket, and the other half goes to fund the court that convicts the speeder or collects the fine.
Mm-hmm.
And the authority that sets and enforces speed limits, the state government, regulates and taxes the insurance companies that also gain revenue from speeding enforcement because your car insurance goes up. So there's monetary incentive by the government in order to abuse the system.
Yes, but there's a really easy way to avoid being abused, though, and that is don't exceed the speed limit, and you won't get these tickets.
So what you're saying is you should do whatever the government tells you to do if you want to avoid their impunity.
In this instance, yes, because it has an additional benefit, and that is for the safety of everyone on the road. Where are you encountering these unreasonable speed limits in your daily routine? Because I'm not.
I think that there are more than the extremely rare case of speed traps. Yes, and I think governments do abuse it. So I don't know I'm not going to say to what percent it occurs, but it's definitely a problem. And so just let me paint this last extreme example, and then we'll move on from this. So imagine that you are coming around the bend of an unfamiliar road,
mm-hmm.
and the speed limit is 35. It takes a sharp descent around this. You take the bend. Oh, I'm all of a sudden going downhill, and the speed limit immediately drops to 25. And there's a cop right there with his radar gun pointing at you, pulling you over, pointing at you, pulling you over, pointing at you, pulling you over. You don't see anything wrong with that.
But if you're going 35 and you go into a 25 zone and you are deaccelerating, no cop is ever going to pull you over unless they're really corrupt. It's when you're going 45 in the 35 and then all of a sudden you're in the 25. That's when you get into trouble. And that's because you were exceeding the original speed limit to begin with.
Okay, so I'm going to let you go a little bit there, although I think we still probably disagree about the percentage of nefariousness of speed traps. So let's talk about how speed limits are determined, right? So have you encountered this notion between design speed and 85th percentile speed?
Well, why don't you describe that?
Okay, so my layman's research, and I did not crazy R&D this like I did fake news, so I did a cursory glance at the data. Basically, when the government is trying to determine what a speed limit ought to be in the U.S., they first do a lot of data analysis, and this in terms of like the type of road, the visibility, all the sort of environmental factors, right? And they come up with something which they call a design speed, which is what is the maximum safe speed to conservatively prevent danger and accidents. But that's typically slower than the speed limit that is eventually arrived upon. The reason is that
because people are bad drivers.
Well, so it's not that people are bad. Well,
well, it's not that people are bad drivers. It's because people are bad drivers, but they think their driving is safe, and so they think, oh, the speed limit doesn't apply to me because I'm pretty good at driving. I don't need to follow the rules. That, I think, is a wrong way of thinking about it.
So if everybody drove 5 miles an hour everywhere, we would have far fewer fatal accidents. Would you agree?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Then why don't we set everything to 5 miles an hour?
Because you have to find the balance between actually getting things done and getting places. And that's what speed limits are for. That's the balance.
But I would submit to you, Tom, that therein lies the disagreement between the reasonable driver and the posted speed limit, which is a reasonable driver going along at, say, 70 on the Mass Pike where the speed limit's 65 feels like 70 is a fair and reasonable and accurate measure of speed, and that 65 is not. And furthermore, and this is where it gets even more difficult, is that, so 85th percentile speed, right? So they determine this design speed, and they say, okay, this is the sort of the speed it ought to be if we're really going to reduce accidents, but people aren't going to drive that. And so let's pick a speed where 85% of drivers typically will follow it. And because there's always going to be some percentage of drivers that are driving crazy at the top, a couple of orders of magnitude above the median. So the speed limit that is typically set, if they're following this 85th percentile philosophy, is setting a speed limit where 85% of drivers will go at that speed or within 5 miles of the speed.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're driving on the Mass Pike and it says 65, you know that 65 isn't actually the speed that the government expects you to not exceed. There's this wink, wink, nudge, nudge agreement between the government and the citizen that we know you're breaking the law, just don't break it too much.
That's right.
When they're talking about 85th percentile speed, that means that 15% of people are going to go crazy fast. 15% is about 1 in 6. It's a little less than 1 in 6. If you think about the number of cars that you pass or that are on the road with you in your typical 40-mile commute time, you're going to hit one of these 1 in 6 drivers every few seconds.
Yeah, they zoom past me all the time.
Yeah, so I would submit to you that your assessment of what the median reasonableness of a driver is, I think you're taking these data points, which are very viscerally impactful, of these 15% of crazy drivers, and ascribing their reasonableness to everybody else. Because you don't notice as much the people that are not driving as crazy. They're not as highlighted as much in your data observation stream.
That's probably true, but it's the people that exceed the speed limits that cause all the problems.
I wouldn't say all the problems. I would say if I had to rank order, and this is really speculating off the cuff, I would say distracted driving is more of a problem than speeding. I would much rather have people driving 80 on the Pike and never on their phones than having people driving 65 checking their phones every 5 minutes.
Yeah, they're both equally bad. I think the speeders will probably cause more fatalities in the long run.
So okay, slight tangent comment there. So I've traveled to India a little bit. Speed limits are much lower on the roads there. There's a much higher frequency of accident because if you know Indian roads at all, it's essentially a number of traffic streams of all vehicle and animal variety coming from one end, merging with the other end, and it's actually kind of interesting and beautiful the way it happens. But anyway, you have a larger frequency of accident, but the fatality frequency is less because the speeds are less.
Right.
In the U.S., because the laws, the roads are more structured and controlled, you get a less frequency of accident, but when you're going at higher speed, obviously it's more fatal.
There's tens of thousands of people that are killed every year in auto accidents. It's way more than it should be. So let me ask you this then. You keep talking about the reasonable driver. Do you consider yourself a reasonable driver?
So, like probably every person, I consider myself a more conscientious and attentive driver than the average driver. Yes.
And so you think you're able to judge what the actual safe speed on the road should be and adhere to that?
I concede to your analysis that as a monkey driving a heap of metal, it is less accurate for me to dynamically assess all the road conditions and do a design speed analysis like supposedly is done when they set speed limits. I concede that analysis is less accurate than the people who actually set the speed limit. However, I do that keeping in mind that the speed limit that is determined is done with the psychology of drivers in mind. So when I'm driving down the road in a 55, I'll go 60, 62 because the communication device of the speed limit is telling me to go, that it's okay to go 60, at least 60. In the US, so unless you get caught in one of these terrible speed traps, or you get a police officer who for some reason is pulling you over for another reason, you're not going to get pulled over for going 5 over.
And that's another reason why I advocate for adhering to the speed limits, not just because of the obvious safety concerns, is that I'm sure any driver is aware that sometimes your speed fluctuates because you're not paying attention and you go faster than you intend to. You're on the highway and you say, oh, I'm going 80. I didn't mean to do that, and so you slow down again. If you stay within the enforced range, when you do make a mistake, you're still going to have that buffer zone.
Excellent observation, Tom, and I will make a personal experience concession here. I do remember when I first started driving on the highways that it was very easy to start going. So the speed limit on the Mass Pike, the big highway in Massachusetts, is 65 miles per hour. It was very easy to go 70, 75, even more.
That's right.
Once traffic opened up.
That's right.
because particularly in the commuting hours, there's a lot of traffic. And so you get this psychology of you want to get there, you're frustrated, you want to get there, you're frustrated. And then when the road opens up, there's this desire to sort of eat up as much space as you can. I even noticed this just in general as I was cruising, because I'm on the pike for more than an hour, that I would just allow my speed to get up and up and up and up. So what I did consciously, even though I felt like under certain conditions, I could still safely control the car at higher speeds, I have a maximum mental speed now. And so I use the cruise control on my car to set it at 72 maximum. So I'll admit to you that I do speed up to 7 miles an hour over the speed limit. So I think the most important principle as a driver, and I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm teaching my son how to drive.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he's got his permit and he's doing great. He'll facepalm if he listens to this because we've told this to him over and over, which is the proactive attention is what separates a good driver from an ordinary driver. It's like it's very easy to just once you get the hang of it, once you're in the habit of I can turn the car on and go on this road and take this left or whatever, to just get into an automated state. And it's even more, I should say, you can get lulled into a sense of safety and complacency because any one instance of driving is probably not going to destroy you. Like if you are on your phone and you're not wearing a seatbelt and you're not using your turn signal and you're speeding, chances are still probably above 50% that you're not going to die in that one instance. And so what it does is it creates now this data point in your head of, I didn't do all these things and I was safe. And the next time happens, I didn't do all these things and I was safe. You lull yourself into this false sense of safety and not realizing that it only takes one instance of smashing into a car for major tragedy to strike.
To you and to others, yeah.
Exactly. So the most important thing, and this is why we're so vigilant about it at the beginning of teaching our son how to drive, is to establish the habit of proactive attention, which is I'm driving down the road, there's no emergency happening, but my extra attention is dedicated to the act of driving. Right. So it's not that after a while you can't put a podcast on or whatever. But I'm looking in my mirrors. I'm looking at the distance between the car in front of me and behind me. I'm looking at the distance between the car behind me. I'm thinking about XYZ. I'm looking at that car turning and not assuming that he's going to make that turn. And I think if you devote that extra layer of attention, it can prevent a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you can also tell him that eventually he'll become a reasonable driver and he can decide which rules he wants to follow and which ones he wants to ignore.
We really hit your lawful neutral out of the park, I think, in our initial assessment, man. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, because you have more experience in this than I do, Tom. There's a lot of debate, and the research from my reading is not conclusive on this point. Is it dangerous to be driving at a much different speed than the average speed of the other cars on the road?
If there's too great of a delta, yes, it is dangerous.
So in teaching our son how to drive, one of the first times he went on the highway, we're like, okay, your first time on the highway, don't go over the speed limit. He was going 55 on a 55 highway, and cars are zooming past him. And conditions were good, it was daylight, etc. But it felt dangerous in the car, not because he was driving it, right? Because the delta was so great. The other thing about on a highway driving is that, if you're going slower, you have to be in the far right lane. And so you're always merging with cars that are coming on and off the exits.
That's the lane I usually drive in.
Okay. So how do you deal with it? Do you feel like there's an extra layer of nuance there that like, whoa, I am much slower than other cars on the road. I have to be extra careful?
I think if you're going 65 during a usual commute on the highway, it's not that great of a difference. I mean, you'll always have the jerks in the left lane who think they can go as fast as they want, but they're at least 2 lanes away from you.
So in terms of like the psychology of how we get drivers to do this, have you heard of this program called Vision Zero?
No.
Okay, so our Swedish listeners may be familiar with this, and our New York City listeners. So it's essentially a policy by the government to try and get to 0 traffic deaths.
Good. Yes.
And it's a combination of speed limit, but also ways to enforce speed limit and ways to work with human psychology to get cars to drive more safely, and also to get cars to drive more safely with other forms of transportation, whether it's bikes or pedestrians. So there was a speed limit change in New York City a couple of years ago in this Vision Zero policy. It was mostly along the lines of making it safer for pedestrians and for bikes. And so there's lots of different things. And it's not just about hardcore enforcement, like cops pulling people over for traffic tickets or speed limit cameras, which is probably the most effective in terms of the hardcore enforcement. But things like gentle speed bumps in residential areas, mm-hmm. or this whole notion of traffic calming, where
Yes.
Okay.
I'm very in favor of traffic calming.
So these are things like, they're not necessarily immediately punitive, like you run a red light, it takes a photo, you get a ticket, bam, punishment. But it's trying to encourage the psychology. It's basically trying to leverage the good-naturedness of drivers, Tom.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it.
One common example in the U.S. is what do you call it? When you see a digital readout of how fast you're going?
It's a signpost that shows you how fast you're going and how fast over the speed limit you're going.
Yeah, and so it's not giving you a ticket. There's no police officer there, but it's a reminder.
It's just scolding you.
Yeah, and so there's other sort of interesting nuances of this where they'll paint a crosswalk with using a brick design. It'll make it look like bricks, right? And so you see it and you immediately think, oh, that's more conducive to heavy pedestrian use. And so you intuitively want to slow down, as opposed to just two white lines across the road.
Yeah, I'm absolutely all in favor of these things. Anything that can get traffic fatalities down is a good thing. I don't care if it means people have to go slower. Boo-hoo.
Boo-hoo indeed.
Yeah, my basic message to other drivers is that it's not a race, and there's no prize for first place.
Right, and there's actually a very nasty penalty for not finishing.
So why are you in a hurry? There's no need to be in a hurry. Just drive courteously, drive safe.
You've given me a lot to ponder, Tom.
Very good. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you have questions or feedback for us, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, or Reddit. Tell us what you think, and we thank you for your support.